but people like you have ruined so many videos. One off-key voice drowning out the choir. Yeah. All right. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. Following the wrong God home, finding our way home. That's what I've been musing about lately. How do we create home? How do we know when we are home? What does home really mean? What does home mean when our earth is changing so fast? Ecologist Bill McKibben suggests we should have a different word for our planet now. We should spell Earth with 2 A's to mark the fact that it's already so radically changed. What does home mean when 1/4 of the people on the world don't have a shelter every night? What does home mean for those of us who have lived in and love many places, and maybe spend some of our time in several places every year? There are so many sayings about home. Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home. Home is where the heart is. East, west, home's best. I agree with all of those. And yet I am perpetually restless, perpetually scanning the horizon to imagine where I might go next. After years of resistance, I finally accepted that restless horizon, that edge, that homesick place, that place of longing, is in fact my home. When I was about 7, I read a book called The Forgotten Door. It was about a boy who fell through a door in the stars from another planet, a planet where people were kind and nonviolent and psychic and vegetarians and very physically strong. I became convinced that I too was from this planet. I read that book over and over, searching for clues about how I could get back to that planet, as the boy did at the end of the book. Because I knew in my cells and bones that life as I saw it around me was not all that it could be. I believed that I belonged somewhere more like that boy's planet, someplace kinder, more generous, more fun. I imagine now millions of kids have sat around waiting desperately for an owl to show up with a letter from Hogwarts, knowing deep in their souls that they are not muggles. They do not belong in a magic-free world. So it's been wonderful to be here with you. So many of you here feel like kindred spirits to me in this way. As the song, as Rumi says, wanderers, worshipers, lovers of leaving. I have talked to many of you this week about what home means to you, and while I pick up restlessness from many of you, I don't sense unhappiness about the restlessness. Some of you are in transition and tell me you're about to go somewhere else. Some of you are very settled, living in the same village where you were born. Some of you are thinking maybe you'll move, but you're not sure. You're thinking about it. All of you have a sense of home that is complex and multi-layered, and that complexity feels like home to me. I spoke with the kids and the youth about home. I asked the young kids how they know their home, and they said things like, the pigeons. They mentioned how their animals, stuffed or alive, help them to feel at home. Home for them is certainly centered on parents and school and playgrounds and siblings and friends. I spoke with the youth about home and the complexity about what that means for every one of them in different ways. And of course, it's harder for teenagers because they don't get to decide where they live. And for many of them, the longing to be somewhere else is partly because they want that decision-making power. I remember as a teenager longing desperately to be anywhere but Akron, Ohio, please. And so that longing is part of that age, and yet some of us don't seem to outgrow it. And so I would say that here, now, is the only place where any of us can ever really live. Here, like a turtle walking with a home on its back. What here means shifts every moment. But here is the only place that any of us can truly live. Right now, we live in this room together. As the Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh says, our actions are our only true possessions. No matter what address is on our ID cards, and no matter where our heart is. As I've wrestled with this idea of finding home, staying home, finding the right star to guide me home, I've been inspired by an unlikely teacher, the inventor of the trend of artisan toast. You heard me, toast. Artisan toast, like you put in a toaster, bread that you toast. I don't know if this trend has come beyond England. I can find it in England online, but not yet to continental Europe. It's a trend that began in the San Francisco Bay in California and is now spreading to other large cities in the United States. Foodies, people centered around food, pay $5, $6, $7 for a piece of toast. Toast. Now, when I first heard this, I thought, oh, California. If you're not from the United States, you might not know that people from other parts of the country often shake our heads and say, oh, California. Some people there have way too much money and think very highly of themselves. So when I first heard about artisan toast, about people spending a lot of money on a piece of toast, I presumed that it was somebody playing the emperor's new clothes with food. Someone saying, let's see, what could we get people with too much money and not enough to do to spend a lot of money on that doesn't cost us much? Toast. But in fact, according to a fascinating article in a magazine called Pacific Standard, this trend towards toast is due to a woman named Giulietta Corelli, who runs Trouble Coffee and Coconut Club in San Francisco. What fascinated me reading this article is that Corelli, far from being a hipster, began selling toast out of her own vulnerability and need. Corelli has a rare kind of mental disorder that had kept her from steady jobs or housing. Sometimes her inner life would become so overwhelming that she would from time to time and completely unpredictably simply not know who she was. In those times, she might walk aimlessly for months, disconnected from everyone and everything. She would lose her identity. She would lose her job. She would lose where she lived. At some point in her life, at the beach, an old immigrant man that she met changed her life by listening to her story and then asking her a powerful question. What is your useful skill in a tangible situation? Corelli was trying to figure out how to make a life that could work. And when he asked her this question, what is your useful skill in a tangible situation, she knew immediately. She was very good at making coffee. When she did hold down jobs, it was generally as a barista. And she thought, when she was a kid, cinnamon toast had always been a source of deep comfort. Maybe it would comfort others. Corelli says that Trouble, the tiny coffee shop she opened in a funky neighborhood, not at all hip, in a one-car garage, is a tool for keeping her alive. She says, I'm trying to stay connected to the self. At the coffee shop, she is personally known by hundreds of customers. So these days, when Corelli forgets who she is, she says that a hello and a call out by name from a stranger in some unfamiliar place makes the difference for her between getting home and forgetting who she is. I wear the same outfit every day, she says. I take the same routes every day. I own Trouble Coffee Shop so that people recognize my face so that they can help me. Reading this article about her, I was struck by her genius. She has structured a life that keeps her remembering who she is, that enables her to find the right star to guide her back home every night. And then when I thought about it, I was struck by the fact that her genius was so palpable, was so noticeable, that others were drawn to it too and started to copy it. And other people started to sell toast. They copied the form instead of the substance. The form it takes for Corelli to find her way home is running a coffee shop and selling toast. That is her useful skill in a tangible situation. The substance of Corelli's journey is creating a life that reminds her who she is, that lets her use her very particular gifts. She said yes to herself, just as she is. She said yes to her needs, and she created pathways to hold her and to take her home. And she named the coffee shop Trouble. Aren't we all in some amount of trouble when it comes to finding our way home? For those of us who don't want to open shops and sell toast, I recommend considering what it might be instead to emulate the substance of Corelli's life. What might it look like if we shaped our lives very particularly to make sure that we got home every night? For Corelli, physically getting to her house is a challenge, a significant challenge. For most of us here, that is something we take for granted. So for us, I'd ask, what is the deeper sense of home to which we are longing to return? That kind of longing, homesickness for a home we've never known or that doesn't exist, has no word in English that anyone's ever told me. But in a surprising number of languages, a word does exist. For the Welsh, anyone speak Welsh in here? Oh good, I can butcher the pronunciation. The word is heraeth. In 1282, Wales became the first colony of the English Empire. Because England eventually ruled half the globe, we all know Wales only by the name the colonizers gave it. Wales, which means place of the others, or place of the Romanized foreigners. That's how the Welsh, the original Britons, became foreigners on their own land. Some Welsh people write about heraeth as a form of resistance to oppression, continuing to long for home when someone more powerful walks in, makes themselves at home, and names you as a foreigner, is remembering every day that another reality exists, even if dominant powers have said it does not. The Portuguese have a word, saudade, which means a vague and constant desire for something that does not and probably cannot exist. Or it can be translated, the love that stays after someone or something is gone. This word is especially important in Brazil and in Brazilian African music. I have to imagine that Native American languages also have these words. Surely when the Dakota Expulsion Act was passed in 1863 in my home state of Minnesota, telling the Dakota people that they were no longer able to live near the Bedote, the coming together of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers that they called the center of all creation, that sacred place from which they were expelled. Surely they had language to express a homesickness for that place they would never be allowed to return. And so for the Welsh people, the Dakota people, Brazilian people, especially those descended from slaves, people from whom home was essentially stolen, I would imagine that that kind of longing for a home that doesn't exist would be so constant and familiar that it would be almost cellular, almost part of DNA as centuries go by. As an American, not a Native American, but an immigrant to that land, an immigrant removed enough by generations not to remember the place from where my people came, as a person who benefited from the theft and identity theft of those who were in Minnesota a century before white people, this concept of homesickness, this longing for a home I've never had, is more complicated. But I think of that 7-year-old child and what she knew, and I hold to it still. I still know there is no need to live without magic, without joy, without kindness, and without enough for everyone. And yet I see all around me every day that we humans continually make it otherwise, deny one another what we could offer if we dared. As an adult, of course, I know that anything resembling a generous a community-minded world needs to be created by those of us living here in this precise place we inhabit today. I've seen over and over that people coming together with dreams are the only ones who can change the world, who can imagine worlds into being. And I see that longing, this kind of homesickness, is one road that can take us there. This past May, I had the great joy and privilege to visit Iceland. The Church of the Larger Fellowship's board chair, Stephen Jonason, took a group of us touring there. I was really curious to see it, to see the beauty, but I also really wanted to know if I would feel different in a place where people are overwhelmingly well taken care of, where everyone has health care, where the gap between rich and poor is the narrowest in the world, more like 1 to 3 compared to the United States, where I live, where money is not spent on military might and everyone has education. Now I know that for some of you this sounds a lot more like where you live than it does for me, but Iceland's a really remarkable place. And I did feel different there. I've never felt so relaxed in my life. Even on meditation retreats, I felt more stressed than I felt there. This led me to wonder how much anxiety it creates in our bodies to live in places where even if we're personally doing fine, we know that all around us there are people who are suffering from human-made afflictions, poverty, racism, joblessness. How much of that suffering would lift if we knew that we were taking good care of each other? Remember Gioletta Carelli back at Trouble Coffee Shop? She imagined a place that would not only imagine her to find her way home each night, she also imagined a place where she would be spoken to and known by strangers, but also where they would speak to and come to know each other. So the article was fascinating. And first of all, it said there were no chairs in the coffee shop. There was just a giant limb of a tree where the author said everybody draped like animals with their coffees. There is a very short menu: coffee and toast, grapefruit, because Corelli learned in a time of homelessness that you can live on grapefruit if you need to, and coconuts. Remember, it's the Coffee and Coconut Club. Whole coconuts from which you drink the milk. Why coconuts, you might wonder? Well, Corelli learned while in New York City that if she stood on a street corner eating a sandwich, nobody talked to her. But if she stood on a street corner drinking coconut milk, people would say, "What are you doing?" And she thought, if people have coconuts, they'll talk to each other. And apparently it's working. Like Corelli, I deeply long for people to connect with each other, with me, with our deepest longings and desires to live our lives with purpose and fulfillment. For me, Unitarian Universalist communities have been the place I could most deeply live out that longing. As a child, our small fellowship was the place where my family was best sustained, where my parents laughed and talked, where all of us learned that there was joy and music and laughter and respect. I feel that here, the relief that comes from being in community where people truly see one another, where there is love and kindness. For many of the members of the CLF, the people in my congregation, home may feel distant. Many are in hospitals or nursing homes, on various kinds of extended work trips, on overseas work assignments, some of you, in prisons, in the military, and college. Most are members of CLF precisely because with all of that, they want a place to call a spiritual home. I love thinking of the services that we offer as clues to help the people to remember who we are and to find our way home. The great African-American theologian and minister Howard Thurman wrote, "There is something in every one of you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. It is the only true guide you will ever have. And if you cannot hear it, you will all of your life spend your days on the ends of strings that somebody else pulls." The sound of the genuine. You may be right at home where you live now, or right now you may be far from the place which most deeply means home to you. But hearing the sound of the genuine in ourselves, transforming that sound into a particular shape that works for our own lives. May we each create home wherever we are. May we find exactly the support that we need to create a spiritual home that fits. And may that home always mean sharing what we find with those around us so that together all might feel at home yet on this broken, beautiful planet. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. Please join me in singing our closing hymn, number 121, We'll Build a Land. And I'm going to invite you where it says Brothers